Oh, the content of this meeting is being sent to a third
Yeah.
party. Got it.
Mhm.
Oh, the content of
Wagwan, everybody. You have
Why?
tuned in to Broadcast Jamaican, the media outlet of the Jamaican Language Unit. The Jamaican Language Unit is a language planning and advocacy unit set up in the Department of Language, Linguistics and Philosophy at the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies. We do research on the history and structure of the Jamaican language and advocate for government to recognize the language rights of all, not some Jamaicans. And we propose that this can best be achieved by making the Jamaican language official alongside English. The nation is bilingual, so it's time for the state to catch up. Today, we will be speaking about the making of Paramount Studios' Bob Marley One Love biopic from the perspective of language. And we have with us members of the language team that ensured that you were served good linguistic quality. I am Joseph Farquharson, Senior Lecturer in the Department of Language, Linguistics and Philosophy and Coordinator of the Jamaican Language Unit. I served as linguistic consultant to the Bob Marley One Love film. I am joined today by a very distinguished group, members of the language team I mentioned just now. We have Mr. Kingsley Ben-Adir, Ms. Brett Tyne, and Ms. Faye Ellington. Kingsley Ben-Adir is a British actor who has worked in both theatre and television. Kingsley graduated from Guildhall School of Music and Drama about 13 years ago. He has been cast in a wide variety of roles which demonstrate his professional range. He has acted as a US president, a Ken doll, revolutionaries, a detective, a thug, among others. I first came across him in King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. He has also appeared in One Night in Miami, where he plays Black revolutionary Malcolm X, Barbie, where he played Basketball Ken, and of course, Bob Marley One Love, where he played the lead role of Jamaica's musical icon and gift to the world, Robert Nesta Marley. Welcome, Kingsley.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Joseph.
Brett Tyne was born in Nashville, Tennessee, but her family moved to the UK when she was 9. Brett holds an MA in Voice Studies from the Central School of Speech and Drama. She works in film, television, and theatre in both the USA and the United Kingdom as one of the most diverse and sought-after dialect coaches in the industry. Her work has placed her in the credits of films such as Aladdin and Dune, independent projects such as Judy, and Apple TV's highly anticipated Masters of the Air. And of course, she was dialogue coach for Kingsley Ben-Adir and LaShawna Lynch in the Bob Marley One Love biopic. Welcome, Brett.
Thank you, Joseph. Lovely to be here.
Whew. And then our final guest is a woman who I'm tempted to say needs absolutely no introduction. I've said in other circles that if Miss Lou is Jamaica's mama, then Faye Ellington is Jamaica's auntie. She has worked for decades as a lecturer in media and communication studies, but is probably better known for her work as one of Jamaica's leading broadcasters on radio and television. Some of us grew up with her as a vivacious host on JBC TV's Morning Time, and I'm not trying to date you.
I've done so.
She's no stranger to the stage, having served as actress, director, and dialect coach for different projects. She has been twice recognized by the government of Jamaica, first in 1998 with the Order of Distinction Officer Class, and then promotion to Commander of the Order of Distinction in 2015. Faye, we're glad to have you.
I'm glad we're there. I'm glad to be here because we speak 2 languages here.
So, and that's why I'm going to start with you, Faye. And I'm going to ask Brett to chime in on this, because there are two terms being bandied about. I'm seeing dialect coach and I'm seeing dialogue coach. Now, on the movie, Faye, you were dialect coach, Brett, you were dialogue coach. What are these things? You know, help us to help the audience, the viewers, to unpack these two terms. So, Faye, what's a dialect coach? What does a dialect coach do?
Let me just tell you how I got into this project and got you, the JLU, into this project. When Paramount spoke with Cinecom, which is a production company in Jamaica that channels all of the productions that come through Jamaica, Natalie Thompson got in touch with me about this business of being a dialect coach. And I said to her, you know, I think because Paramount wanted also someone to look at the language of the period. And I said to Natalie, I think you need to speak with the Jamaican language unit. Joseph Arkeson is a good person to connect with. And so that is what started me off in it. My role, I believe, was to ensure that the language and the nuances of the Jamaican language in all of it, with its idiosyncrasies, were to ensure that those nuances, although you had to work with the JLU and the phonetics of the language that is scripted, because as an actor, you're not going to be speaking the words exactly as we have them there for the guide. You're working along a continuum. And in Jamaica, I'm speaking as I am now, but we could have just broke out and said to you, well, you know, Joseph and Kingsley and Brett, may I tell you see what I'm saying? So what is this character that Ben-Adir is going to play? Who is Bob? What language? In what period? What are the utterances? What are the nuances of that time? Who is Lashana? So although they had, and Brett played such, and I keep saying this in every interview, Brett played such a critical role in the foundation of getting the language to Kingsley and, you know, getting those scripts transcribed. But the thing is, in addition to that base language, those base language notes and skills, we had to look now, who is this person that Kingsley is playing, and who is this person that Lashana is playing, or whomever else, to ensure that we found those things that mattered to those characters and played them through. So for me, it was ensuring that the cultural identity, that the language period and time, that we had it right, that any little utterances that we might say and the saying that didn't fit into the 70s, and great for me, I am a product of that. I was a young woman in the 70s. I was playing Bob's music. I grew up in that period, in the cultural identity around it. So my role, I believe, was just to make sure that the language along the continuum was recognized and utilized in such a way that the authenticity would never, ever be lost.
Okay, and you know, I'll go to Brett for her response to the dialect coach, dialogue coach question. But glad that you mentioned that, because I didn't know that my hours spent poring over, you know, Jamaican Creole from earlier decades, earlier centuries would have come in handy. You know, I would have thought, you know, who cares about that? And then came your call and then the follow-up call from Paramount to say that they needed somebody who could check the language of the script and to ensure that this thing was period appropriate. Yeah, I learned something very important, because although I was in theater in high school and also at church in my church days, I completely forgot that actors ad-lib. And so, you know, I went through and did, you know, a pretty decent job with the script, ensuring that everything is in order. The script is given to the actors, and then they start, you know, adding things here and there. And I was going crazy, like, okay, suppose they use a word that wasn't in use in the 1970s.
I would fix it.
We do then, and, you know, we'll fix. But Brett, so you appear as dialect coach, dialogue coach, and in some projects. Is there a difference between the two?
They're sort of interchangeable, I think. That's always been my understanding. Dialogue, it's to do often with language as opposed to accent, which is, you know, as I would not have any idea about Jamaican language in the 70s. So that was very much hallelujah for Faye and you. And getting that right was 100% essential. But for the role, as I see it, as of a dialect coach, is really to equip actors with a new set of sounds and speech patterns for a role that they need to take on, something that's different to their own. And in equipping them with that, you need to look at the vowels and the consonants and the rhythm and the tune of an accent and the tone, stress patterns. And then that sort of happens in the pre-production period, because what you want is for an actor to not have to think about any of that stuff when they go on set. Because as Kingsley will know, playing a character like Bob, you have singing, movement, dancing, performing, playing an instrument. And so you really want to have the accent squared away in your back pocket, so you don't have to think about it. You can then focus on performance and what you're saying as opposed to how you're saying something. So a lot of the work is done in the pre-production. Most of the work should be done in the pre-production period.
How does this compare to other projects that you have done in terms of language and your preparation for the work?
It is definitely the most challenging thing I've ever worked on to date, because I was really struggling to find the way that I work normally is to take my understanding of phonetics and I do a breakdown. So I have to be able to understand the language and teach it to myself before I can teach it to the actor. And listening to Bob, I always start by listening, and then I look at the vowels and the consonants and say, well, this one goes here and this does this. And for Bob Marley, and I could only figure out about, maybe 40%. I was really struggling. And then just when I thought I figured something out, I would be, no, it's not that. Most actors, Kingsley, I don't know if I don't think most actors from my experience don't use phonetics. So you need to find a way of writing orthographically these pairing letters together that make sense for you and for the actor. So the actor you have a common language that you speak. And I couldn't understand, I couldn't create one for Bob. So then I went into started looking at the linguistic papers, and I couldn't, from memory, the linguists were not even saying this on the same
page.
And so then I started listening to, went to good old YouTube, and that was also another minefield. But I found Shan's Patois Academy, and I saw that she had two ways of writing things. And one of them was Cassidy. And I thought, who's this Cassidy guy? So I had seen his name in the linguistic bibliographies, and I ordered the Dictionary of Jamaican English, and it resonated with me. And I thought, I can understand this. So if I can understand this, I think I can put it in front of Kingsley. And he had his whole own way of, which Kingsley, you created this way of, because he started working on this months before I came on board. And so he had created his own system, because we like systems. We like to know that this sound goes here and this sound goes here, and then you can do it. But the Cassidy writing system resonated to me. And so I learned it, and I took it to Kingsley and said, I'm figuring this out. What do you think about this? And you liked it, didn't you, Kingsley? It was it worked, and we figured it out together and learned it, kept learning. And then we met you. Thank you, Faye.
Oh, me?
Yeah. Because
so you mentioned the Cassidy system, and just to be clear, this is a writing system created by linguist Frederick Cassidy back in the 1950s for representing the Jamaican language. And so there are two ways of representing it. And people who are familiar with reading the newspaper columns of Professor Carolyn Cooper would know that she uses the two systems. One of them she calls Chaka Chaka, which is the way in which a lot of Jamaicans write the language using what is called I dialect. And so it's standard English spelling, but with modifications to indicate that the letters don't have their standard English values in terms of sounds. And then the other one, which he calls proper, and that's the Cassidy, what you're referring to as the Cassidy system. So you came across the Cassidy system and your life changed.
Yes,
Minded.
I can make, yeah.
Kingsley says, mine did.
Oh, no, Kingsley, you can come in because before, tell us what you were doing before Brett came on and Brett came across, had her Damascus experience with the Cassidy system.
So I was picking one interview at a time, sometimes two, from a WeTransfer file that Rita Marley sent me.
And so you're talking about interviews that Bob Marley had done in the 1970s that the family had archived, and you had access to those.
Some of them, were on YouTube and available, and some of them weren't. And I figured that I would try and write them down in a way that made sense to me. And what happened is I kept coming up against all of these bumps where I didn't understand what Bob was saying. And sometimes, worse than that, I thought I knew what he was saying, but I later found out that I was massively misinterpreting what he was saying. So completely changing the meaning of like whole sections of conversation that mean that you can't understand the full arc of what Bob's talking about because you're missing the connecting pieces. And there were many of them. And so I have a friend called Horace Parry, who is Jamaican, British Jamaican. His parents came over to the UK from Jamaica, I think, in the 50s, and they own a salon here called Aquarius, which is the longest running black salon in London, in Finsbury Park. And Horace would come over to mine, as well as one of my barbers, Steve, and we'd put Bob on half speed or three-quarter speed and try and understand what he was saying. And they eventually explained everything that he was saying pretty much, apart from a few moments that no one, even Stephen Marley, eventually didn't know what Bob was saying, just because the sound, because Bob was just talking his own way, but also because the quality of the sound. Or we'd catch. There was one interview where it started in the middle of a conversation, so we couldn't work out what he was saying. And then I guess once I had transcribed 3 or 4 or 5 of those interviews in my own Cassidy, I guess I was writing it in kind of sounds and letters that made sense to me. And then before I met Brett, me and Horace did our own version of trying to figure out a system where he would explain the sounds. And then, so that went on, and then Brett and I met, and then we kind of recreated what I was doing in a much more, I guess, practical and specific way, I was basically winging it for 4 months, just desperately trying to understand what Bob was saying and trying to understand how I could say it. And I was listening to him, but I think at the same time, I was also trying to absorb his worldview as well, like who he was in terms of what he thought, as well as the language. So they were the first steps, and that took me up until July. So from March to July, I think we started working in July. I was just listening to Bob and freestyling, really just trying to absorb and listen to him as much as I could.
You do have Caribbean background. Is that on your mother's side, I believe?
Yeah, my grandparents on my mom's side are from Trinidad and Tobago, and they
Okay.
came to London in 58, 59, maybe 60. I think my grandma came a bit before, and then my granddad came after.
Okay, great. But the community you grew up in London had no Jamaicans?
Oh, no, plenty Jamaicans.
Okay, so it is not that you had never heard the language before.
Oh, no. I grew up with Jamaicans. Yeah.
Never heard Bob Marley. You didn't
Never
have
heard.
to translate Bob Marley. That's what I meant. Because even for us, Kingsley, it was difficult to understand sometimes what Bob was saying, even for us Jamaicans.
Yeah. And
Kingsley, there's a term that you use, which I'd like you to explain, because you have referred to, what you call Bob speak. What is Bob speak?
I guess when I say there's there's certain things that you hear Bob say, or like a style of like speech pattern that I've never heard anyone else. No other Jamaicans necessarily would speak like that. And I'm trying to think what some of the examples were. I guess I just mean like Bob characteristics or like certain ways that he would express things. Um, because he was also very poetic in the way that he talked, and he he's very consistent over the years in how he expresses himself and what he talks about. So start to see themes in 71 that he's still talking about in 75, and then in 76, he's really, and listen, there were moments where I was like, maybe it's just his public persona was very strong. He was very clear about his religious beliefs. And before he set foot in an interview, he wanted to be very clear about what he wanted people to know about what he thought. Whatever version of that was something that just kept coming up. It was always, he would always, in some way, shape, or form, bring it back to Haile Selassie and God. And that was it. There's not one interview where that's not really the main theme of what he's talking about, unless they're trying to divert him into talking about women or talking about music or talking about this or talking about that. But he was very clever about bringing it back to where he wanted to talk to what he wanted to talk about. So I guess when I say Bob speak, it was more just the things that he would talk about as well.
All right, great. Brett, let me go back to you because you worked with both Kingsley and Lashana, who, we expect different things from. And in some of the reviews I've read, people expected Rita to be using the same sort of language that Bob was using. What can you see about that, based on, the work that we did, what we discovered about, Rita versus Bob?
Well, we discovered listening to Rita in interviews, she's speaking very differently to how Bob speaks. And that was immediately noticed. She doesn't speak patois, really. There are not that many interviews that we found, and we had conversations. Lashana and I spoke, and we spoke with Faye, you were involved in this too, that Rita, the interviews were a very public Rita. And privately, she possibly wouldn't have spoken the way that she speaks in interviews. So we worked to try and find a middle ground where if she's arguing with Bob or whatever she's happening in the scene, how would she have spoken? But the language that she used was not as deep patois as Bob, for sure. And but she wasn't quite as measured as she was in the interviews that we see. And we also had the joy of having the Marleys on set, so they could say, oh, our mother spoke like this. So that was obviously a huge help. But when using the writing style for Lashana's dialogue was different to Kingsley's.
And what we did was to take the Cassidy JLU system and modify it to represent English. So the Cassidy JLU system did both the Jamaican language and Jamaican English.
It did. It was.
Sorry, go ahead, Brett. Finish.
No, go ahead. No, I was just going to finish that.
Yeah, this is what the point I was making at the start, which is that there's no one way to speak using the Jamaican language. Particularly if you're playing a role, you have to find what is appropriate for that role, at what point along the continuum you have to go. And so when I worked with Lashana myself, it was clear after the family would guide in terms of how their mother would speak, that she could not do the Cassidy as you have it at JLU. Just wouldn't work, I call that the basic foundational. And so she had to go to this place, which was Rita's place in terms of her language and her style. I also want to say something because I wouldn't want the time to go on. I neglect to say the diligence, and I'm just speaking now, both of them, but Kingsley in particular, the diligence that Kingsley applied to his work is why we are so proud. Because yes, he had JLU and Cassidy. Yes, there was Brett. Yes, I was there saying, no, don't use that inflection, come down with that, or whatever it is. But I want to just recognize the time and effort and diligence, because he could have had all the support. He could have had it, my dear friend Neville Garrick. We all were supporting and giving, saying, no, do that way, or yeah. He could have had all of that. If he did not have the capacity, and if he did not apply himself the way he did, which was his responsibility, his total responsibility, to my mind, it could never have happened that we would be singing the praises of this man who played Kingsley Ben-Adir, who played Bob, and Jamaica is not falling to pieces because they are dissatisfied.
Yeah.
So, Kingsley, I just want to say this publicly to you.
Thank you so much.
Your hard work, your diligence, your application, your capacity. I just want to say that.
Thank you.
And Kingsley used the word of Bob in several interviews, and this is work. Bob was a worker. Bob worked. Which you stressed heavily and so on. And I think this is what I saw from you. So when we had that first meeting in the early days, Kingsley, when Brett had sent me to check you out, the report I came back with was that he is doing pretty well. Already, there were just things, some things that needed to be polished off. So I'm going to ask you, Kingsley, then, what were some of the sounds that gave you the greatest trouble?
There was so many, and Brett will probably remember better than I will. But what I'll say is, like, my approach is that the process is never ending until we wrap. So we're still discovering in each scene. We're still trying to figure it out on set. That's what rehearsal was. And really, because of the language with this, it was the same. So I had to let myself off the hook. By the time we got to October, and it wasn't completely there. And then we knew that we were going to need all of us to kind of come together in the way that we did, however accidental or random it was. The system was just something I can't imagine now walking into any one of those scenes without the Cassidy text, because it just allowed me to feel safe. So I started to understand when I wasn't doing it right, which was, I think, was a huge achievement. That I knew if I hadn't hit, and it was mainly the consonants. It was mainly that actually Bob pronounces and uses his sounds a lot more than I ever could have interpreted on my own in the beginning. And I remember feeling like that on the last week. I was like, wow, he really, you kind of can't go too much in a way. It's so different to the way that I speak. But there was something about it was when words would be next to each other. Brett, do you remember there was a few of them like
yeah, but I think I remember. So let's say, for example,
Day was one.
Think is one of them. I mean, to think.
Yeah.
That often we don't have a final at the end of think. So think. So Jamaicans will say me ting say, me ting. So not me think say, but me ting say. And in normal speech, that is how things flow. And so, once we had gotten that going, and I remember us marking letters that you wouldn't necessarily have to pronounce to indicate to you that you should, flow, from one sound to the next, into the next word was quite, interesting. Brett, your sounds, the sounds that gave you trouble?
The IE, we.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a killer for me. But it's interesting too how, for me, the freedom again, to Faye, to your point, you know, there's no way with language, it's changing. There's different ways to do things, but we were able, and I wasn't able to know, for example, I don't know, you know, you put that into Jamaican, you have a short no and a long no. And in connected speech, you have multiple ways to say that. So we had a system that we could, you remember Kingsley, there'd be certain sounds in brackets. So you can put an H on that or not put the H on that, and so there were always options for him, and he had it in his brain so much visually, he could see it, and you had it. It was all there. And I think when you're saying, you know, you could hear when you made a mistake, or if you weren't aware of something, it was just, there's other stuff going on. I mean, there's so much to think about when you're acting, especially for this role. It's never ending.
But I'd like to say, sorry, go ahead, Kingsley.
No, I just was going to say, I look back to it now, and I think it really was. It really was all of us. You know, like the time that we had leading up to it was so necessary. Like all of it. There was not it required it, if not more. You know, it was completely essential. And maybe I didn't want to ever take my foot off the gas, because there was a moment we got to in October or November, I think we were on Zoom, Joseph and Brett, where I was like, this really is, I've been going at this for 7 months, and this needs all of us to kind of, you know, go one day at a time in a way. I guess in answer to your question about sounds, there was so many of them. You know, so each week it would change, and then you'd get one, and then it would kind of be secure and you wouldn't have to worry about them. And then something else would pop up. And we were, you know, listening to, I think there were even a few sounds that Bob did say that other people didn't say. And then we had the conversation about, okay, most Jamaicans don't say it like this, but Bob says it like this. What do we do? Because the audience are going to think that I'm saying something wrong, when actually it was that Bob said it like that, but most Jamaicans don't. So over to you, Faye. Sorry, that was my.
No, I was just about to say to the thing said, you see, I'm going to take, having lived a little longer than all of you, I want to say what I have, my lived experience with the language. We still have people who say think say, the K is there. But the more modern 90s, 20s will say things say. So
Yes.
that is the challenge with the language. There is no one way, and we have to be particularly careful and pay attention to that. So for example, going back to Rita versus Bob, she would perhaps say think say rather than thing say.
Yes.
You know, so those are the things that I made the difference in this production. And also that with the Jamaican language, a lot of it is let me tell you something. Non-verbal communication plays such a big part in our language. Non-verbal. And so just the way you move, or you lift your hand, like Lashana had a scene when we were working in the choir with her and Bob. This is a Jamaican thing. When a woman says she's done with you, we do that. This is it. Finish. And those are the things I would say, yeah, yes, use that, do that, whatever. So you see, it was not just the words that would come out of the actor's mouth, but the experience that the actor was having, and that experience will be transmitted to who sees the movie.
Since the spotlight is on, go ahead, Kingsley. I'm going to come back to Faye.
After you. No, please.
Okay. Well, I was going to take it in another direction, so make your point.
It was really that I've forgotten what I was going to say. No, after you, it's gone.
All right, great. So Faye, you must have had quite a task, because you were working with, primarily with Jamaican actors born in Jamaica. You were working with American actors who have Jamaican parents, and probably several other, types of situations. How did you?
Hang on a moment, and also paying attention to Kingsley and Lashana.
No, man, I know that.
Yes.
So how did you make that all work? Because you now need everybody to sound Jamaican, but also sound like individuals in the thing.
The younger actors, all right, let me begin with the Jamaican actors. The Jamaican actors, that was not a problem with accent. Where I had to be a little on them was enunciation, making sure the words come out so that when the product is finished, people can hear and understand what they're saying. The actor or actors in America, then they also have strong Jamaican backgrounds and family. So it was to have them move out from the American accent and go back to your yard accent. And they easily flipped into that. Then we had actors who were in England with Jamaican parents, but who are global in a sense. But one of those, thank God, we could have just allowed him to be himself, and that was Junior Marvin's son. He was just so good at what he did with just taking the accents and rolling them and doing stuff to them. Because that's how Junior Marvin really was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yes, it wasn't a big challenge, a challenge in terms of accents, really. You had to work with some people a little longer than others to get certain things, so their inflection, the tone, etc. But sometimes it was just ensuring that the words were coming out clearly.
You mentioned inflection, and can you remember either Faye or Kingsley, a point in filming where that came out very clearly?
Yes, Kingsley.
Oh, what are you playing down there?
Yes, no, you remember, eh? Yes, that
yeah.
one.
When he said Aston, we I played on, and I don't know if it was a Trini thing or it was a moment I didn't understand it.
I
and
know.
and then even in ADR, I still didn't understand it. So we
But
just
you
had
eventually got it.
to do it technically.
Yeah.
I still didn't understand it.
Yeah.
Which
You
is
see,
bizarre.
that's what the Jamaican thing is really very difficult. I don't know why it is so difficult. And then perhaps Joseph can tell us if it's more difficult than Trinidadian and Bajan. I have my own views on that. But it is this weird thing. Where are the down there? That's what we say. Where are the down? King say, where are the down there? And where are the out there? But so many people can't easily make that kind of sound. So you get because it's a question, you think you're supposed to go up at the end.
Yes.
Where are the down there? But that's not it. It's where are the down there? And other little things like those.
So it's a matter of, it's a combination of things. So stress and intonation, etc.
Yes.
English is a language that's based on stress, and a lot of English poetry is built on, where you stress the thing. Jamaican is different. So it's not just the stress, but, the prosody of the thing, the intonation of the thing. And sometimes you might even have a situation where the stress and the intonation appear to be doing opposite things. So you have to know exactly where. Even the language is what linguists would call syllable timed. And so we tend to break at syllables, etc. And if you listen to Miss Lou, you get that sense. And where it comes out clearly is where you get two words coming together. And you have, for it to flow properly, you have to place the last consonant of the first word with the vowel of the word that follows it. And so, you put it over in the other syllable. So all of these little details, one has to get right in order for it to come off as natural.
You're so right. And we do that with English as well. So we talk about the prime minister. You trap the two M's, rather than the prime minister. You do the prime minister and you have that, Yes, similarities there.
So Brett, so I'm looping all of you back in now. I could see Brett. Kingsley worked, I think, I'm ashamed to say so, but I think I worked extremely hard because I was working with people who would not rest at all. And there were moments where I said, Brett, it is okay, it's all right. And she said, no, but is this the way Bob would say it? And so she kept on going back. So again, that work ethic. And once it got to Kingsley too, and him ensuring that he got it right. I saw something, and Faye mentioned it with Kingsley, that for Kingsley, the representation was extremely important, and it wasn't so much about film and entertainment that the whole project would capture the essence of the man. And I think that's one of the takeaways for me from this entire project. So not even the language, but Kingsley's approach to capturing the essence. The language was a part of it, but his philosophy, his ideology, what was that, and how do you convey that on screen? So Kingsley, so you were going through these, interviews, reams and reams, which we eventually got transcribed for you in the Jamaican language unit. Ms. Susanna Campbell-Blagrove in the Jamaican language unit did the transcription. Her title is down as admin assistant, but the beauty with Susanna is that she doesn't only concern herself with administrative matters, but she understands what it is we do in the unit, and she knows how to do it. So Susanna will do translation, she will do transcription, etc. And so she's a very essential part of the team. But you get these things, Kingsley, and I know it was because of your agitation why some of these things were incorporated into the script. Just tell us a little about that.
Well, I don't have anything really physically the same as Bob. Like my voice is different, my sight, everything. So how he spoke really became the only thing that I could concentrate. It was the only thing that I had to let go of everything else, because there was no amount of weight or anything that was going to make us feel the same. As soon as you put me next to someone who's a foot shorter than me, the whole illusion just completely disappears. So Bob's voice is also in a different register than mine. And there was a moment where I was trying it and it was just never going to work. So all I really had was that. And I know Jamaicans, and we'd speak before, and I got no business being a part of this film if I'm not going to work like that to represent the talk and to represent the culture. And I know, because of the Jamaicans who I've grown up with, I know what the feeling is. I know what the feeling is, and I know what the suspicion is about the film before seeing it. And I understood that, because I would have been the same. And I guess after listening to Bob so much, it was never the intention, but it needed everyone to come together to work it, to make sure it was on the page. But there was never a version of this film where there wasn't going to be an attempt to represent the way Bob spoke specifically, because I think Bob would have been against that. And we, of course, there are, in the cutting together of the film, there were some improvs and scenes that I extended and added whole sections of the interview in that, were probably just never going to work for the film. Yes. But I needed to go through those motions of Bob in the studio talking for 5 minutes that they probably were never going to put in the film. But I needed to do that to tune in with him, to kind of find his flow and his voice. I guess his essence was the only thing that I could aim to do, It's sorry, I forgot what your question was.
No, I think you answered it. You answered it.
Yeah.
I would say,
Okay.
did you, before taking on the project, did you get the sense that you would be doing something like Yorkshire or Bostonian? Because you said, you know, you could have, you might have well have
Maybe
been
French.
doing Welsh
No,
or
no, I
French.
said I might as well have
French.
been French. And I only meant that because the work that it would take for me to learn a scene in French,
Mm-hmm.
play the scene like a believable French person, I don't think is that dissimilar to what we went through with Bob, even though the Jamaican is an English-based language.
Mm-hmm.
I and you'd know more than me about, like the syllabic nature, the way Bob uses sentences and structures and words. It's oftentimes so different to the way that I talk that it may as well have been. I think maybe a better example would probably be like a heavy, 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 heavy working class Glaswegian accent where, it was one night I had I met Lego and David, Bob's friends from when he was young. And we were in a loud place. And Ray was with me and they were talking, Lego and David, and the music was loud. And I realized that Ray didn't know what they were saying. And I was only picking up, you know, 70-80% of it. I was missing huge parts of the conversation. And it didn't so much, it did worry me. And but at some point you go, right, this is the situation. So what do we do? And that's that system of having the scenes transcribed, and we were rewriting bits and changing. I think whatever that process was, it was like trying to find Bob's voice in a community with help. I've been trying for 7 months. I feel like I've got so far. And to get it to the next level, we need to switch it up and do something else. And that's when everyone got involved, and I really, really, people, actors, they like to have their own space and do stuff. The more there was a conversation about it, the more relaxed I felt. The more I saw you guys running around going, no, it needs to be this and that, made me feel like, oh, I'm not crazy. It is this difficult if we're really trying to be specific, if we're not aiming for a kind of version of it, you know, I think maybe in 3-4 years, you still couldn't get exactly like Bob's so specific, but the attempt was to get as far as we possibly could. And I watch the movie now and I see so many of those moments in the final cut, and it makes me feel not like a crazy person.
Let me just add to this, Joseph, the role that Ziggy played. You talked
Mm,
about that script business and that language and Brett there with him and bouncing things off me, etc. And it was very, very important. And if you'll allow me to say, even though Neville Garrick was not working on the script per se, I think Neville played a very important role. Like I would, we're from the same age group, we have the same experiences, we know what was going on, the cultural authenticity that he would just remind us of. I would be dealing with the language part of it. No, in Jamaica, I wouldn't say it that way, whatever. And never was speaking about even things like onset, looking at, I would say, no, I don't think the ladies would wear that because it wasn't the fabric of the time. But all these things speak, all these things speak volumes. And I just want to take these few seconds to thank Neville Garrick for this role. This movie just would not be what it
Guidance.
is
Yeah,
without him.
because he was there every day.
Not just there every day. He worked with this man called Bob Marley every
Yeah.
day. He designed his sets. He designed his album jackets, about 12 or 10 of them. He was the lighting designer. He was Bob's friend. He left Jamaica to Bahamas and then to the UK with Bob, after the shooting. So he lived Bob, he experienced Bob, he knew Bob. He could guide us on who Bob was and likely how Bob would say something.
Mm.
Really, really, really. I mean, I when I think back, the piece that he bought me, because you know he's going to tell you if it's not or if something feels off. So when he tells you it's all right, it was a series of him going, no, man, it's all right, it's okay, that allowed me to kind of really ease into it as much as possible. A line I'm really proud of, I don't know who wrote it, I think Ziggy wrote it, is when Bob says, Jar soon tell we the right song for sing, man. And I don't know why. I think it was written the night before, but it was just one of those lines that I was like, that's Bob.
Mm.
That's Bob. That wasn't there, in March when I started. But those were the changes that really, uh, I think subliminally, with enough of those planted, it allows for it. There are so many breaths where um, there are things that Bob would say because I know them from when he said them. So, so,
Yes, yes.
so like it makes me feel like it's cool because he said it, and then
But Kingsley, you know how Brett almost lost it. Oh, you remember Brett? She just, I'm gonna have to call Joseph. And Pete,
yeah,
what do you think about Brett?
yeah,
I swear at one point you're gonna get a heart attack.
yeah.
Oh, you
That was
Joseph
feel
the
should have been there with her every step of the way.
there's
She
a
was
huge sense of
again, she was just she gave her soul and heart and time and dedication to this thing, and was open to accept guidance from me saying no or no, fix that, whatever. Yeah. So Brett, I also want to, whenever I've done an interview about this movie, I never do it and not speak about the team effort. Because as you say, and I've heard you in your interview say, a bunch of people were there giving you stuff. That's what it was. A bunch of people who knew what they were about and all the disparate parts coming together for what we now have.
Mhm.
Brett, since your name was called,
Yes.
so you met this Cassidy JLU writing system. And the next question I'm asking it because we are at a very important juncture in the development of the Jamaican language, where there are, way more positive attitudes to the language than in Bob's time. And there have been talks from political parties about making the language official. The writing system, the Cassidy JLU writing system is what the JLU has been proposing. Some Jamaicans say it is hard to learn. And so I wanted to hear from you as an outsider, somebody who didn't know this language before. How difficult was it for you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult was it for you to learn the Cassidy JLU writing system?
To be honest with you, it was not difficult. And that's predominantly because of my base understanding of phonetics.
Mm-hmm.
So it was easily accessible for me, which is why it just suddenly everything clicked. I'm going to say Kingsley, not understanding phonetics, I think once actors are used to, I speak for you, Kingsley, but learning to, I'm going to say, unread words. So the way that we traditionally view how a word is spelled, actors have to have flexibility to be able to read sounds in different ways. So for me, the basic phonetic background made the Cassidy easy to understand. And then in teaching it to Kingsley, I think Kingsley, over to you. I mean, did you find it difficult to learn?
No, I mean the system made sense to figure out the sounds of how Bob would say things, but oftentimes when I was reading something, I already knew what it was that he was saying. I was just trying to work out how to pronounce it. But what I do know is that they're, Jamaican is one thing, but when you hear people hollering at each other and people are talking fast, that's when you really understand how much you don't know, how there's one recording of Bob in the studio, it's black and white, and they stop and he hollers something to Tyrone, then Tyrone hollers something back. And I had to ask Tossin, and Tossin knew what he was saying, and I think there's one interview where Tyrone says in the background, we should carry him a Hope Road and then he'll know. And I spent months not knowing what he was saying. And I remember Horace telling me what he was saying, and then I listened to it and I go like, you can't, you know, how long would you have to live in Jamaica to be able to communicate in a way that was in the heaviest form of patois? Because there are so many in betweens. When you're in Jamaica, you meet someone who talk this way and that way, but
That's it. So
and
there's
it's
no one way with this language, absolutely, which is the point I started out at the beginning. But just so you feel it, understand what is happening here, I just picked up my phone. This is somebody from Toronto sending something. Bob Marley, One Love is a beautiful movie that evokes pride and love for Jamaica. Okay, and then it speaks about one gentleman called Kingsley. I don't know. Kingsley Ben-Adir is the embodiment of Bob Marley. Okay, the embodiment. And it goes on about Lashana's Rita. But I'm telling you, man, people are just, them are big up a movie. You understand? Me no say, you understand me I say. Right,
Um,
Kingsley? Them are big up a movie. Okay.
Kingsley, somebody in the chat spoke about giving you Jamaican citizenship. And you
love
know,
it.
yeah, and I told you I've heard about people on buses saying, yeah, but he's not Jamaican, So you did a really good job there. I want to ask you the same question, Kingsley, that I asked Brett about the writing system, because the reports I got from SET was that when new lines were added, because Brett would write out your lines in the Cassidy system in purple ink, it became known as purple, and you'd ask, could I have that in purple? So how difficult was it for you learning, becoming acquainted with the system?
I know it allowed me to the reading system I found it really simple, but it was because I knew what it was that I was saying. Do you know what I mean? So it was just showing me how to pronounce it. I found it very um it was a complete and utter game changer. It was a complete and utter game changer. I and it was about trying to get everyone on who was a part of the film to understand what this system that we were doing was, like Marie Sophie and stuff like that. They're getting early and pages are coming in and pages are changing. My script's written differently to everyone else's, and there would, if a scene had come and it didn't have the thing on, we couldn't move on. Not that that ever happened, but
Yes,
it was the cultural representation, what in my mind were in all of those sounds. So we got to get each one of the sounds. Um, oh, it was a real.
It's interesting what Kingsley just said, though. Had you not heard those things prior to, it might have been a bit more challenging, the
Mhm.
Cassidy. And that is what I think, well, in the Jamaican context, people find it challenging. That's another
Mhm.
story, Brett.
Mhm.
So you have the two systems that Brett spoke about, the chaka chaka and the proper proper, but they have to get their mindset to that
So
because
my next question was to you, because you're Jamaican, Faye, and I know you can manage it. I'm giving you the hardest question, and this is about, because you've mentioned it in an interview and linked it to the language in education. So if you could make that point again, because we have the national standards curriculum, which was implemented in 2018, says that children should be able to read and write in both languages. That's the most progressive curriculum we've ever had. And the
most,
question is, what system are we going to use to teach children, to read and write the Jamaican language?
I would say it would have to be the Cassidy, right? But I want to expound on that a little bit more. Why the Cassidy? Because it is everybody would write the same way if it is taught. For the chaka chaka spelling, we will write things slightly different. You'll write it one way, Brett will write it one way, Kingsley will write it one way. Yes, we'll be able to look at it and know what it is. But the formalized spelling, phonetic spelling from Cassidy would be very helpful. And I have always felt, well, you know, I have used both my languages in media and on stage for 50 years or more, and have had criticism for it too for some of the times, particularly when I started out doing the early morning show in radio. A colleague said to me, I hope you're not going off the air with that Jamaican thing that you use sometimes. And yeah, because of how people look at the language. Of course, I heard it, I focused on it, and I thought, because Ken Maxwell, the late pro rata Powell, had sent me a beautiful letter, which I'll include in my memoirs, that said he was watching me MC at an event and the ease with which I moved between both my languages. So yes, we do have two languages, but to empower our students, we need to speak to them in the language that they use every day, on the play field, at home, when they are going to do chores for their parents. And because if they get that and understand whatever concepts you want to teach them, whether it's math or physics or English, then they are well on their way. And I don't know if you shared it, Joseph, when Professor Devonish was in charge of this unit, there was a pilot program. And I remember how passionate I got about this pilot program. Some schools, I know St. Richard's Primary was one of those schools where they went in, they taught the teachers and the students. And those students took to this thing like a duck taking to water, and their performances improved in their other subject areas. Now, why our Ministry of Education cannot understand and see that we have to step on this thing now, not just for them to learn to speak Jamaican, but if you empower them with their own language, they're going to do better in every other subject.
And you see, all the countries that we are trying to imitate, you know, the so-called developed countries, developed world, for most of them, they provide education in the first language, in the mother language of the majority. And there's this big uproar about the PISA results. When you look at those same countries, immigrants actually fall behind. And that is because within these same societies, immigrants are not being taught in their first language. And so this whole matter of teaching in the first language in order to develop, you know, full potential all around is so important. It's so important. It's so important. Kingsley, we're wrapping up because, you know, I promised you that it would be 60 minutes. This is not the program 60 minutes, but we want to keep it to 60 minutes. Somebody in the chat wanted to know if you have ever visited Trinidad and Tobago.
You know, I was supposed to go with my my grandma in 2011 for 6 months, and I was just leaving drama school, and she went with my brother. And my brother stayed for months, and he'd never been, and he met all my aunties and he got on well out there, you know. And I never went. And I wanted to go to Trinidad before I went to Jamaica, because I felt that it wasn't right. There was something before we started, but I was like, I have to go to Trinidad before I go to Jamaica.
Sorry, you can't turn back the hands of time, you know.
And you've been to Jamaica more than once.
And we are claiming you. Yeah, more than once. Because you came back for the premiere in Jamaica.
I've started looking at my how I might go about trying to get my Trinidadian passport. And
oh, good.
And I'm gonna make my way out there, you know.
Excellent. Tell me some of the places
that I haven't been, you know.
Yeah. Tell me some of the places you went in Jamaica with the cast and crew.
Well, if my memory will allow me, everywhere just kind of turned into what scene we were filming that day is but we were in Bull Bay.
Bull Bay, yeah.
That was the first place that we shot. But before we were shooting, I came 3 or 4 months before.
That's right.
Natalie set me up with
Natalie Thompson of Cinecom, yes?
She set me up with everyone.
I believe she may be online. I think I saw somebody tag her. Big up to Natalie.
Oh
Yeah.
Lord, this would all of this conversation would not be happening had it not been for
Without
Natalie.
Natalie,
My
yes.
God. You know,
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah. Yeah, you know, I really stayed. It was sort of contained. I didn't get to travel with everyone, you know, because on the weekends, everyone had days off, and they'd go to all these wonderful places where they drive for 5, 6 hours. And I always had a scene to learn for the next day or a song to learn. So I really stayed. I stayed in Kingston, and
Mhm.
I would walk around early in the morning or late at night on my own in whatever park I could find, just listening to Bob. So my experience of shooting in Jamaica, shooting the movie was very intense. I feel like the time I spent with Jamaicans in Jamaica were the Jamaicans who were working on the film, um, and the elders and Neville, and that really became my experience of Jamaica when we were shooting. You know, there were Mortimer Plano had a student who worked under him that Natalie set me up with, and we drove around for days, and he took me to so many places, and I think I spoke to maybe between 15 and 25 people within 10 days who all knew Bob in some way, shape, or form. Um, and some of those conversations went on for 6 hours, some went on for two, some were very quick. Dan Jobson. Um,
That
uh,
drops.
yeah, yeah. So yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling.
I'm going to ask about your favorite Jamaican food, but when they did the premiere in Jamaica for that screening for cast and crew, in an interview, and I don't think you realized what you did and why Jamaicans are about to offer you Jamaican citizenship is because in that interview you said Auntie Faye.
Oh
And
yeah.
you struck a chord, with Jamaica. And I said, oh, he says Auntie Faye. Okay.
Well,
And so,
I grew up, my grandma and granddad, I had to call everyone auntie and uncle.
yes.
The
Who
first
am
I
I?
heard you say that because on set the youngsters would call me that because that's what I'm called. But when I didn't hear it live, just somebody said, "Oh, I saw a tweet that said, oh, he said Auntie Faye. That means if he said Auntie Faye, he can stay in Jamaica."
Yeah,
Yeah.
the respect kicked in once I knew I was being recorded because I remember my grandma, you know, if I didn't say auntie, you know, or uncle, it was a sin, you know, it was something,
Yeah,
it
Caribbean thing,
was a
man.
respect thing. I guess because I got so many gray hairs now, I didn't on set, I didn't feel like it was
So you
necessary.
didn't need to say that on set, Kingsley.
So, Kings, so your favorite Jamaican food?
Fried plantain, it has to be. I'm think there's a
Hold on, ripe or green?
ripe,
Ah, okay.
a lot of oil, deep fried. It, I can have it for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or a snack.
Wow.
My grandma used to do it, and yeah. But when I go to get Jamaican, I order like 7 or 8 dishes, so I always have it all together. You
Mm.
know, I have ackee and saltfish, I have jerk chicken, I have a spread where I like to
You have
have a
curry goat?
curry goat,
Okay.
oxtail, everything. So, but stew, I always kind of go for a stewed chicken or something loose. There's a great guy here. He does stewed pork. Sometimes he does different salmons, and so
You
I'm
certainly are
open.
not Jamaican, Kingsley.
Mm.
Unless my grandma was lying.
Stewed pork, stewed chicken. I
And
can't say.
and fried plantain.
Fried plantain, yeah.
Yes.
All right. So, as we wrap up, I'm going to just ask, Brett, your final words about this whole project, this whole experience that we have participated in.
I mean, life-changing. The learning, I just loved every minute of the learning. And new language. I didn't understand the complexities. I don't. I have so much more to learn. And getting to work with you and Kingsley and Faye. I mean, Susanna, what a team. Just a really special experience. And to be able to, dig into Bob, get to know Bob. What an honor. Thank
Yeah.
you all.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys.
Faye, your final say.
a privilege and an honor to work with the team, but also to work with Ziggy Marley, to see him. The Ziggy Marley I knew as when I was on air in the 70s, 80s, it was Ziggy Marley and the Melody Makers. I met him now on this project as a grown man with a family in his 50s. I did not know that side because he left Jamaica. And he was just so steady. I never heard him raise his voice. Brett is there, she can tell you because we were next to him all the time, didn't raise his voice, but he knew what he was going for and he was going for it. But so Ziggy and Stella was there too, but Ziggy was the hands-on person. So just an honor, privilege, and pleasure to be part of anything that is capturing this global icon called Bob Marley.
Yes. Kingsley?
I agree with everything said. It was I look back, now I see you all here and there's a different energy. It was very intense. It was very intense. But I look back and I go, it was appropriately intense. There was an intensity that I needed, and it really was a joy spending that much time with Bob, although it was intense. I was fine. I look back and it's I just wanted to be able to make sure that I would, one of my, it's just going to sound crazy, and I mean it, was to be able to set foot back in Jamaica after the film comes out.
I understand that.
I was like, I just want to be able to set foot. And so whatever it took to get us to that place. But yeah, what a joy.
And don't make it too long before you set foot back in.
Back.
I wanted to come back ASAP.
Yeah.
Sunshine.
I want to say, it was great for me. Of course, because of my role, then I had to think this is not just Joseph Farquharson participating in this project, but this is, several decades of people before me, linguists, language activists, from Claude McKay to Louise Bennett, to Joan Andrea Hutchinson, Hubert Devonish, a whole set of people coming before whose dreams were now being realized, because this is a watershed moment for the Jamaican language. It sets a standard for how Hollywood treats with the Jamaican language going forward, and also opens up opportunities for many other people, for Jamaicans involved in different ways in film production and so on. So it was an amazing experience. And I think too, I was, because of that team and what I kind of call the chain, I could rest assured, because I knew, having seen and heard Kingsley, having worked with Brett, and then knowing that at the end of all that, Faye is there, so we are going to get that final polishing, at the end, and anything we miss along the way, there is going to be. So all of that coming together, I think, made me aware that this was going to be something different and something important. I want to thank you for spending time with us to discuss this very important thing. Bob Marley, One Love biopic. It is still in theaters, doing very well. It has passed the 100 million mark at the box office, and still raking in. And I think that's testament to not only the work of the team, but also who Bob was as a person, as a human being, and then what the movie represents for Jamaicans. So thanks, everybody. By the way, before I forget, for that writing system that I mentioned, the Cassidy JLU writing system, if you are interested in it, the Jamaican Language Unit sells copies of a book called How to Write Jamaican. And so if you want the book How to Write Jamaican, you can contact us. You can contact us by email at jlu@uwimona.edu.jm. That's jlu@uwimona.edu.jm. Or you can send us a WhatsApp message at 876-209-9065. That's 876-209-9065. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for spending time with the language team on the Bob Marley